everyone doing? All right. Well, good. On behalf of the Alamo Colleges District, it's really my pleasure to extend a warm welcome to tonight's event. I think we're in for an engaging conversation. And, you know, this is Hispanic Heritage Month, right? So we have celebrations, especially during the month of September and October. We want to be able to honor critical voices in our community, things that we should do each and every day, specifically in San Antonio and who we are and who we represent. And we're particularly want to underscore the partnership that we have with the San Antonio Book Festival. Because this allows us to bring authors that are part of a national discourse like we are tonight, to be able to not only engage in community dialogue, but also to bring them to our college campuses. And those of you, how many students do you think we have in all 5 of the colleges? Just, I don't have a prize, maybe a book. But if we could just have 1 or 2 folks, how many students do you think we have? 20, 40? Did you read my notes? Yeah, so, yeah, he does get a book, yes. So we actually have, we have 77,000 students that are at all 5 of our colleges and our centers. And 5 years ago, we had 60,000 students, which shows that there is an aspirational community that is seeking to provide hope and opportunity to themselves and to their family members. Of those 77,000 students, 70 were reflective of our community. 78% are students of color, Hispanic, Latino, African American, and Asian. The majority of our students are Latinas throughout our region. And so we're particularly proud not only to be here tonight, but we're proud to be a sponsor of the Get Lit series with the San Antonio Book Festival. And it's an example of how at the Alamo Colleges District, we seek to extend learning beyond the classroom onto the college campuses and most importantly into our community. The partnership with the Book Festival highlights the importance of understanding perspectives that impact our community, particularly in a year as critical as this year with the upcoming presidential election and with an assortment of other issues that we're engaged in what I think increasingly we see as a polarized society. College campuses in particular seek to be a main square, to be able to bring folks from divergent viewpoints together for discourse that is proactive but also pragmatic. And this evening, we're honored to have renowned journalist and author PAOLA RAMOS with us. PAOLA, and I'm sure you all went and looked, and I know that they're going to provide an introduction to her bio, right? But you may have seen her on MSNBC. You may have seen her on Noticias Telemundo. And she really is the voice of a generation. I was fortunate in the past week and to listen to some of her audio interviews in which she sounded, I think, like many of us would say, folks in our everyday conversation or in our family, at the table or at a barbecue, code switching from English to Spanish, being able to talk about things that are important to us within our community. And I'd have to say that but it's not my wife Martha and I have been following her trajectory as a journalist and author for many years. And so we're glad with the release of her second book. We'd talked about this would be great to bring her in 2020, but something happened. And so we're glad to finally have her with us in 2024. And we know that this is a community of practice and coming together. So I'd like to thank Lily and Anna from the SA Book Festival. And I'd like to thank Eric, who's one of our colleagues, Dr. Eric Castillo from the Alamo Colleges. Most importantly, I think we're all excited to be here, and I want to thank you. We hope this conversation with PAOLA leaves you inspired and eager to engage in discourse. We're in for an exciting night. Thank you all.
Good evening. Buenas noches. I'm Lily Gonzalez. I'm the executive director of the San Antonio Book Festival, and I'm very honored to welcome all of you tonight. The Get Lit Author Series is a program of the San Antonio Book Festival, and it's produced in partnership with Alamo College's district and Texas Public Radio, and our bookseller is Nowhere Bookshop outside. And the whole point, as Dr. Flores said, is to bring you thought-provoking conversations with highly esteemed authors, which we can definitely expect tonight. Through this partnership, we've featured journalist Michelle Norris talking about race in America, writer Javier Zamora sharing his personal story about crossing the border illegally as an unaccompanied child, John Paul Brammer exploring queer Latina identity and more in his advice column, and many others. We hope and we invite you to join us for more Get Lit events in the future. You can follow us on socials and wherever you get your news. Sign up for our newsletter to stay informed about upcoming events, like the launch of our newest program, Spotlight, at the Empire Theater on October 28th, featuring Amor Tolls, or our signature fundraising event, the Book Appetit Literary Feast, on March 6th, featuring none other than, breaking news, nobody knows this, Salman Rushdie. Table sales will go live very soon. And of course, you need to save the date to join us at the 13th annual SABF on April 12th next year. Yes. I just want to quickly acknowledge some people in the audience. If you are a board member of the Book Festival, can you please raise your hand? Huge thanks to the board members. And huge thank you to First Lady of San Antonio, Erica Prosper, for being here with us. And then just some housekeeping. Kindly silence your phones right now. There will be opportunity for audience Q&A towards the end of the program, and I'm going to scratch this out because I just received word that they are sold out of books. So I hope you got yours, but Paola will be signing after. Now on to the program. The Latino voting bloc is fundamentally different from what it was 30 years ago. Democrats have historically assumed they can rely on the Latino vote, but recent elections have called that loyalty into question. PAOLA Ramos' new book, Defectors, The Rise of the Latino Far Right and What It Means for America, casts aside the misguided notion that Latinos are a monolith and looks at the expanding part of the Latino community moving steadily right. I know I have that in my own family, as I'm sure many of you do as well. Our moderator this evening is Laura Garcia, the managing editor at the San Antonio Report. A former evening news editor at the Texas Tribune, Garcia previously reported on the business of healthcare at the Express News and has bylines in many places, including the Victoria Advocate, the Roanoke Times, and Corpus Christi Caller-Times. She graduated from Texas State University. She's a past president of the San Antonio Association of Hispanic Journalists and is a regional coordinator for the Society of Professional Journalists. And of course, our featured speaker and the reason we are all here tonight, PAOLA Ramos is a contributor for Telemundo and MSNBC, where she is the host of Field Report. PAOLA is the author of Finding Latinx, In Search of the Voices Redefining Latino Identity. She's an Emmy-award-winning journalist, a Mexican-Cuban-American, the epitome of chingona, and I'm so proud that she's with us tonight in San Antonio. Please welcome Laura Garcia and PAOLA Ramos.
Wow. I know that's all I can say. Wow.
I'm like trying to see. Yes, lots of people in here. This is great. Okay, welcome, y'all. Thank you so much for being here. I know you heard all the welcomes and you're done. You want to hear from her. But thanks to, let me see, Texas Public Radio and Alamo College's district. I had to say that, in the San Antonio Book Festival. So my name is Laura Garcia. You heard my bio. I'm a journalist, and this is Get Lit with PAOLA Ramos. And this is amazing. I'm so excited to be here.
No, me too. And just want to start by saying thank you to all of you for showing up. I know there's so much happening in the world and in Texas, and there's a million other places that everyone could be at. And so I genuinely feel the love and support, and this is what I love to do, you know, learning from these spaces. And so just thank you so much, truly.
Well, I mean, and I just feel really lucky because I feel like I could have, I don't know, you're a journalist, I'm a journalist, we're besties.
I want to interview you.
Right? Yeah. Like, feel like we're friends now. No, but so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna ask some questions, and then I'm gonna open the floor for a few more questions. So have them ready. And then I heard that all the books are sold out, so that's a good thing. Yay! And thanks to Nowhere Bookshop for that. Let's see. Let's start with we picked out an excerpt on page 7. I'll let you do it. Okay, let you do it. I think it was page 7. And so I picked that because as I'm reading this, a lot of what I was reading was resonating with me so well because it was like, it's so personal, it's so deep. It's not just like, oh, here's the politics, here's all the, news or whatever. You actually, it's like you're taking everything and you're reflecting, you're having that self-reflection. So yes, please go.
I'll start in that moment, okay. So it wasn't until I stepped onto Barnard's campus in New York City that I realized that the image I had of myself was different from the way America saw me. As a light-skinned Latina with a Cuban mom and a Mexican dad, I had never really thought about myself in racial terms. In Miami, I lived in a Latino bubble, where both class and skin color privilege insulated me from my differences from mainstream America and distinguished me from other Miami Latinos often marginalized from the community, such as Afro-Cubans. This bubble of privilege burst on the first day of classes. While most of my peers took the mandatory freshman year English seminar in different auditoriums, I was told to go down the hall to the English as a second language classroom. It's true. I remember how ashamed I felt walking down that hall and how much I wanted to turn back toward the sea of white American students. Wasn't I supposed to be with them? Weren't they what success in America looked like? The very success I was being sent to an elite Northeastern college to achieve. Yet the moment I opened the door of the small classroom where ESL classes were being held and sat at a table full of first and second generation Mexican, Dominican, Salvadorian, Black and brown students, I felt more at home than I ever had. I'll never forget that day. So background, my dad is Mexican, my mom is Cuban. I was born in Miami. At an early age, my parents separated. And so my mother's side of the family, the Cuban exile community, they found a home and a refuge in Madrid. And so when my parents separated, I spent about 15 years of my life in Madrid, which is why I have the thickest Spanish accent that I've never been able to get rid of. And I'm like the only person in my family that speaks de esta manera muy española. And so imagine, sort of growing up in Madrid, a country that really welcomed my family after the regime, a country that in and of itself was going through a democratic transition from Franco to democracy. And so even within that beauty, they also sort of obscure, I remember in class, they teach you about history in a very obvious Eurocentric way. And then I go to Miami when I'm about 16 years old because my father's dream was for me to always go to an American college. But those years in Miami, within a Cuban American exile community of Miami that is very privileged, I basically thought for many years that all Cubans look like me. The idea of Black Cubans, which are very much sort of the foundation and the fabric of Miami, was always neglected and erased. And then I go to Barnard College thinking sort of what I had always been told, that I was supposed to be in sort of the class with the white students, only to get there on my first day and have them tell me that my English, that I couldn't be part of that. And so I think all this to say, that initial walk of shame, which is very true. I talk a lot about what I learned in this book, which was so much about myself and my own privileges and a lot of things that I've had to unlearn through the years, to walk into finally a classroom that felt like home. It felt like a relief, and finding sort of commonalities with people that we shared nothing and many things at the same time. And then there's ways to explain it on. I talk a lot about this idea of fantasy heritage, which is like the idea of how we've been sort of trained and taught to kind of erase that origin story, to really see so much of our identities and stories through a very Eurocentric lens. And then how do you get rid of that? So that was sort of the beginning of me sort of doing this dance of where does one belong?
What's so interesting is I'm imagining you in this hallway and you're talking about, I turn this way and I go and be with all this very diverse, with the Latinos, right? And then, or I could turn the other way and be like, no, I belong over here with this more in closer proximity to whiteness, right? And it's so interesting because you talk about these very extreme examples in your book, these people that they look like me, they have, you know, they're first generation, they're immigrant, right? Like they, immigrant parents, they are Mexican, they have Mexican names, and instead of Antonio, they're going by Anthony, and they're, you know, border vigilantes reporting migrants. It was so interesting to me how it's just like, well, that's how, you know, you're making that decision.
Well, I think because as in the United States, obviously we see race as binaries, no? But I think so much of the story of who we are, you know, so much of this idea of the racial baggage that we're carrying from our home countries to the United States, I think that's the part that, at least for me, was always harder to talk about. And I feel like in this country, we typically tiptoe around the idea of race, you know, and colorism and racism within us. So even taking us back to like the 15th century and where this comes from, you know? The things that were never taught in class when I was in Madrid, the way that the Spaniards really institutionalized this caste system. You know, where within that caste system, indígenas, enslaved folks, obviously at the bottom, indigenous folks, and the Spanish colonizers. And within that comes sort of the idea of mestizaje, creating that illusion of a raceless Latin America. That always gives all of us the sort of permission structure to always claim that direct line to whiteness. Yeah. And this all makes sense in Latin America, no? Even if you think about, and I learned so much again, like there's this historian that told me about the way that the Spaniards in a place like Puerto Rico in the 18th century literally allowed some racially mixed individuals to pay a tax, no, to pay the Spaniards money, and allow them to reclassify their race.
That was
right.
That was like, what?
But even that idea of like the concept of sort of like the elasticity of race, no, and sort of reclassifying race, that is things that we carry, and so maybe it makes sense in Latin America. But when you step into this country, where of course Black folks are criminalized, our people are criminalized, immigrants are criminalized, and you sort of are facing those two directions. If you can take the step towards whiteness, particularly in the political environment that we're at today, some people take it. Yeah. I know. Where do you begin with
I know.
that?
Where do you begin? I'm like, what? No, but it's, there's so many parts of this book, y'all, that is just, it's so fascinating. I learned so much. And I was just, what I was thinking when I was reading is, so we're journalists, and you did a lot of these folks, it sounds like you did initial interviews with them working for other outlets, for MSNBC, for Vice News, right? And at what point were you thinking, this is a book?
Yeah. So it starts before. So before I was crazy enough to be a journalist like you, I started, I mean, it's like, why do we do this? Yeah. But I started in politics. You know? So this idea really comes, or I really started thinking about it in 2016. So November 2016, at that point, I was the deputy director of Hispanic press for the Hillary Clinton campaign. And so much, and I say this all the time, but I think about it often, you know, so much of the theory of change of that campaign, and really throughout my entire time working in Democratic politics, was this idea that Latinos would be at the heart of that multiracial, multi-ethnic coalition that would lead Democrats towards that future, you know, that sort of everyone thinks about. So that when you think about like a 2045 majority minority country, it was supposed to look a certain way, and we were always at the heart of that vision. So come November 2016, every pollster that we worked with, all my bosses, like we were all like, what job are you gonna have at the White House? Like, you know, like the sort of how like, it was ridiculous, right? We were like, who's gonna be the press secretary? And we're like, me. But that's to tell you just how
that confidence, right?
The confidence, man. Like
I remember going to sleep and I'm like, everything's
crazy.
Fine.
No, me too.
Woke up like, what?
Not one time were we not sort of. There were just so many blind spots, and one of the blind spots was again this idea that, and they would tell us the reason why Hillary Clinton will win is because of the Latino vote, right? Because the idea was that in the face of someone like Trump, given everything he was saying from the time he went down that escalator, the idea was Latinos would ensure that Secretary Clinton would make it to the White House. Come November 2016, less than 50% of Latinos show up. And so then in that moment, I'm like, all right, like what is this about? There's many ways to dissect that, no? And then come, obviously, November 2020. And after 4 years of Trumpism, and after family separation, and after everything we all sort of see in our eyes, you see a Trump that does between 8 to 10 points better, and that's debatable with Latinos. And then, to your point, then I start doing reportings throughout the country where these sort of, in different corners across the country, whether it's in whispers or in random conversations, these ideas start to come up. Even, and I'm talking like former Democrats, independents, people warming up to the mass deportations and warming up to build the wall and Christian nationalism in very subtle ways. And so it's not necessarily just a book about like, what do you think of MAGA Latinos? It's a book about how easy sometimes and seamless that pathway towards can be.
You turn that way,
right.
So the other way. Yeah. I mean, I think what was incredible is you talked to a victim from the Allen shopping mall shooting, right? That was here in Texas, and you're talking to her, and it was that surprise that the shooter, that he was Latino, right? And you, in the book, you say we shouldn't be surprised.
Well, I think just the idea that just because we're us or just because we're descendants of immigrants, that does not make anyone immune to xenophobia and anti-immigrant sentiments or anything, because that's so powerful.
White supremacy.
White supremacy, exactly. And that oftentimes, like when I would go to the press conferences that some insurrectionists would hold in like Miami-Dade County, that was always how they would start. They would say, "Mi nombre es Gabriel Garcia. I'm not a white supremacist because my name is Garcia." And that is sort of the Enriquetario, right? So I think there's this idea, that our last names and our history is sort of shield us from that world, and to know our history, to know us, and then to understand the way that this country sort of molds you, particularly in an environment full of mis and disinformation. Like we're not immune to those feelings either. And the first person that comes to mind is Enriquetario, right? The sort of former leader of the Proud Boys, and how he really takes that power and runs with it, and it sort of radicalizes you. But what's fascinating about someone like Enriquetario, who now of course is in jail, is that But what's interesting about someone like him is that somewhere, and it happens, I think, with most of the people that I talk to in the book, somewhere along the journey, you realize how tenuous white power really is. When you really think about, did I really belong? Did Enriquetario really belong in that white supremacist world? He believed he did, but one of the first things that happens after the November 2020 election, when Enriquetario was tasked with Latinos for Trump and was tasked to really ensure that Donald Trump won, one of the first things the Proud Boys do is they break up with Enriquetario. They literally put out a statement. Kyle Chapman puts a statement, and he says, very clearly, the West was built by white race and white race alone, and we owe nothing to any other race. And they stop their relationship with Enriquetario, and there he is in jail. And so again, it's a great shield for white supremacy. But the hard work is for us to understand, when you're in those spaces, what does belonging really mean?
Yeah. Wow. I think, and I'm sure that other people that were reading the book that are from South Texas like me, I'm reading this, and you're thinking about your own identity and thinking about how my parents purposely did not teach me how to speak Spanish. Right. And I'm like, yeah, like the Castros, like Selena. Right. Right. I'm like, come on, y'all. But you're trying to explain to people that like you're Latino, but you're not, you may not sort of fit into that box. Right. That people think what Latinos should look like. Right.
Yeah, and that's a real, and I'm so excited to have the Q&A after, because I think we're all going through similar things in different ways, and it manifests differently. Like in Miami, like my grandmother doesn't know a word of English to this day. And she was told that if you want to survive in the Miami Cuban community, just keep speaking Spanish. And so again, it's so, of course, I think it varies so much. But the evolution of who we are now, the way that our community has changed in the last 30, 40 years is real. The no sabo kids, like it's a real thing. Like where most of us are under the age of 50, most of us are now US born, most of us consume content in English, not even in Spanglish anymore, in English. And so the question is, when you think of that evolution and you have these conversations, there is a segment of us that no longer sort of identifies with the solidarity, you know, and that's why it's called defection, no? Because defecting from whom? No, who are we supposed to be loyal to? I have my own opinions of sort of why it's hard for me, and I think for many of us, to distance ourselves from that immigrant root. But there's a lot of folks that just don't see themselves within that light anymore. And it's not a judgment, it's just sort of us as a community facing what's happening.
I think what's really interesting is I learned so much in this book, but the history of the colonizers and how they first came to the country in different parts of the country. You talk about New Mexico, and you talk about how folks can identify with the colonizers over the indigenous groups and such, and how all that history just kind of gets whitewashed, and how some families it better serve them to lean toward being white. And it gets lost, you know. Yeah,
and that's kind of like this idea of fantasy heritage, and the dumbest example. But even when I do some interviews in Spanish, for Telemundo, and my Spanish accent comes up, so many times there's been some people that say, wow, like, ese es el acento. Like, no como mi acento mexicano, como tú hablas, eso sí. Or, you know, there's always this, not always, but oftentimes there's been this idea of like romanticizing that Spanish side. And that can also manifest in New Mexico, no? So I did a story there which was essentially the Latino community divided around whether or not the statue of Juan de Oñate was going to be preserved or not. No, and there was a sector of Latinos that really wanted to honor their roots.
But y'all have to read this. Like, I grew up in Texas, so I had never heard of this figure before.
He was quote unquote like the founder of New Mexico, and so there's for some people that for them was traumatic. No, that was a reflection of the way that indigenous people had been murdered in the hands of the Spaniards, and they wanted the statue out. And then there was this other section of folks that for them there was the highest honor was to, when they identified, putting that weight in the Hispanic of it all, no? And even through conversations, some oftentimes when they would introduce themselves to me, which I know happens it happens in Miami as well. It was like, no, yo soy español primero, no soy mexicano. And then the most extreme version of that sort of fantasy heritage, going back to the Enriquetarios of the world, when a lot of sort of Latino MAGA extremists want to enter intentionally that sort of white nationalist world, online, typically, that's how they would introduce themselves, no? I am the descendant of Spanish colonizers, and that's the entry point into that world, no? That direct line, always, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
I know, super heavy.
It's so heavy, but can we talk a little bit about? Because this is so important. It's so close to Election Day and the insurrection, and you know we just saw the debate, the vice president debate, and it was like we're not talking about that. I don't know. Like it's like this sort of.
You know what was interesting about the debate? So I was thinking about, obviously, immigration was going to come up. And then I looked at the debate that Mike Pence and the vice president had 4 years ago. You know how many times immigration came up in that debate? 0. Not one time. The word immigrant, 0. Immigration, 0. Border, 1 time. And so, again, we're like the evolution, no, of the way that the fear-mongering has really been injected in people's psyche, and just it was just crazy for me to see the way that we were now framing the debate and around immigration in a very specific way, to think that we went from 0 to really the center of this election.
Yeah. Can we talk about January 6th and what you write about in the book? Because you talk to people that were there and that were part of that.
Yeah, so to me, January 6th, and some of the Latino insurrectionists that were part of that kind of are the culmination of like the 3 different elements that I try and examine in the book. This idea of the tribalism, the traditionalism, and the trauma. The tribalism being, with everyone that I talked to that was in sort of the white mob that day, the idea of the us versus them always came up. This idea of they felt like there truly was this invasion happening at the southern border that was threatening their sort of culture, and they really felt the us versus game narrative, that they had to defend the country from them. Then the traditionalism aspect was also there, this idea of the discomfort I think that a lot of them being men, felt in the face of a changing country with changing gender dynamics and sexual dynamics and changing a changing America. And that discomfort was also part of what led them. One of the things that Enrique would always tell me is, this fixation with women behaving in a certain way and with men sort of preserving their roles. And I think in Trump, they see an America that can go back to that, and that yearning and nostalgia is part of what drove them too. And then the paranoia of communism. All of them ended up saying the same thing, that they truly believe that under Joe Biden, this country would fall into communism. And that comes up, of course, so much more in Miami. But that paranoia of this country will turn into this communist regime, that was like the breaking point for them. And then you have these conversations around like, what did it feel like for you to be inside? And there's this rush, and there's this like rush that the power gives you to be among that crowd and to be able to yell with everyone and say things like, this is our house, no, this is my America. But again, what happens when that's done? When the lights come off? What does that power look like? And most of these people are very lonely. They have this history of not really fitting in their communities, not really understanding where they belonged, and then finding something very, very tangible. Not just in a community of the Proud Boys or the Moms for Liberty, but in that power.
The loneliness, it makes me think of, you write about Anthony, who's like a border vigilante, right? He's a journalist. He has his own news outlet, right? And he basically is stalking and looking for migrants at the border. And he's in his car for what, like 9 hours a day?
To this day, he spends hours. I mean, if you don't do it, but if you look at his Telegram and his Rumble, every single day, Anthony, and I'm sure some people have heard of him, Anthony Agüero, from El Paso, and he just spends every single day sort of patrolling the border, going up and down the border, and then doing these live streams. And the content is always the same. It's particularly this fixation with migrant men, with asylum seekers, and really casting them as these dangers. And very, very often now, his language from the last time I saw him until now, like the sort of the essence of the Great Replacement is there, completely. But Anthony is alone. Like Anthony spends all his time alone in his car. Anthony's someone that has a criminal record. And
that's what I love about. So you're reading this, and he's talking about these criminals. They're coming across the border, and then you're like, wait a minute. He doesn't know that I have done a background check on him because you're a journalist. Of course you did.
I was waiting for that moment. I was like, when is it gonna come up? Yeah.
Yes, I love that. I was just like, okay. And then how did he respond?
He was like, so
right. Like,
no, literally, it doesn't even. But that obsession, and it was so interesting because I was like, I know where you're from. Like, you don't need to. But he was just so obsessed with ensuring that I knew that he was American, that he wasn't one of them. And in every other sentence, it was this sort of really intentional narrative to distance himself from them. This is someone whose parents are Mexican. He's first generation, and he lives in El Paso, and everything was around that. And then also, he's someone that, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and a bunch of different members of Congress have done these border trips with Anthony,
where he's like thumbs up on both sides,
Yeah.
But I love I love about the way that she writes this book is that you say, I wonder if they ever think about him again.
No, never. Of course not.
After they leave the border.
I actually think Marjorie Taylor, they asked her in an interview, like, oh, what do you know about Anthony Agüero? And I literally think she had no idea who they were talking about, but it's the same story, of Enrique Tarrio and all of them. Marjorie has never thought about him.
No.
Ever. Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
But y'all, you have to, if you haven't read this book, this is so good. And I especially like that, you don't make any assumptions. Like you should know what the Great Replacement, like you should know what this means. You should. There's no assumptions that you're a true journalist, because it's like you're writing and you're informing people, but you don't feel like, oh, this is going over my head. This is way too, you know what I mean?
Well, no, I'll say, like, there's a lot of pushback around the idea, and I think we all sort of can relate to this, like, and I'm sure you relate to this, no? There's a balance of how much exposure do you give someone, no? And this happens to me all the time on MSNBC. I am of the belief that I want to know what is happening. No, I want to understand. I want to expose it. I want to question and challenge it. But there's so many people in the network that, of course, they don't, and I understand why. And so I think it's this hard balance of how much exposure are you giving them, and they'll take it, right? And like that's the thing, they'll run with it, and they will talk to you. It requires a lot of trust, as you know, to get people to.
You got in the car with Anthony,
right?
Like
No, but I'm talking about like Anthony, a lot of pastors that of course think of me as this like radical left weirdo all day long. That comes up a lot. Moms for Liberty, the Proud Boys, and so there's discomfort in every interview. They don't agree with what I reflect, with what my community reflects. They disavow who I am as a queer person, and you can't ever escape that. But I do think it's important to show, at least to show America, like this is also a symptom of what this country is going through. And it's not okay, I think, to sort of dismiss this idea that Trump is doing, he's getting over 40% with Latino voters, and we think that's okay. To normalize that, I think, does a disservice to who we are, because I think it goes beyond the politics, and it kind of just requires us to have curiosity around who we are. And oftentimes it's about just uncomfortable topics that we just haven't really addressed. And that's what I tried to do.
So good, y'all. Just examining them, just so good. So if we want to start with questions, let's see, we have a mic up here. Anybody brave? No. Melanie? Can you get out? No, get on the mic, because we're recording, girl. Come on. And then, Marissa. I'm just letting all my friends. Sorry.
Be friends with Laura.
Plants.
Benefits. Hi, Paola. Thank you again for coming to San Antonio. I agree with Laura that this is such a well-written book, but also from watching you on your shows and having read Latinx, you do a really great job of telling these stories of people with very differing views of your own, with a lot of empathy and compassion that I don't think that we always see. And with the narrative of what media is today, I feel like it would be very easy for you to paint a completely true but different picture of who these people are. Could you just expand on why is it important for you to share it in this way rather than making them the complete villains?
Because I think the easy part is doing that. No, the easy part is for all of us to just be like, bah, no, they're
crazy.
They're crazy. They're radical. We hate them. Like that to me is like the lazy part. And again, I think everyone is entitled to navigating this how they want. So I'm not here to I think also it's very personal. No, we're also talking about family members and that's a whole Thanksgiving's coming. Like that's a whole other other discussion. So we can have a different conversation about that. But I think when you're able to put the politics to a side, there are moments with all of them that we found things in common, right? Like even one of them, Mario, who's with Gays Against Groomers, right? Like his coming out story and the shame that he felt at the beginning, like I felt that too, right? And like it was very hard for me to come out to my Mexican side of the family, and him and I could relate with that. Someone like Enrique Tarrio, like being a Black Cuban in Miami, in the privileged bubble of Miami, that's really hard. And sort of Enrique's own, for me who grew up in that Miami that didn't welcome the Enriquez of the world, like I also understood why at some point of his life he felt extremely lonely in that. So I could understand what he then felt when the Proud Boys welcomed him with those arms. I am agnostic. Unfortunately, like my dad is, so I grew up this way. But there was parts of my life when I really wanted to be a person of faith, you know, because I believed in those sort of traditional values that my family embraced in Mexico. And so the belonging I think that a lot of people feel in those churches and evangelical churches, like I understand. And then I understand how easy it is, no, for to be in front of the perfect charismatic pastor that can take that very genuine faith and in a moment of seconds turn it into something else. And so I think it's, for me, I've learned a lot about like we can see eye to eye on certain things. And I think right now our job is to ground people in reality. Like that's it. No, it's sort of going back to the basics. And I can do that when when someone's able to humanize me a little bit more and not just see me as this radical lefty from MSNBC, you know? Yeah. Which is true.
Thank you for that question. Which is true.
No, it's not true.
I mean,
Hi, Paola. Thank you for being here. So throughout your reporting, did you see any commonalities among Latinos in terms of generation? Like, we're among like the different generations, was one generation more inclined to have radical sentiments as opposed to another generation? So first generation Mexican American versus third generation Mexican American. I'm just curious, if there's just any, I guess, similarities or differences among generations.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and you report this all the time, so please feel free to help me out.
No.
So I think, generations-wise, I think it's true across the board. No, the younger generations, and I think oftentimes we mischaracterize what's happening. And I think there's this idea that younger Latinos are leaving the Democratic Party. I actually think it's that they're challenging the Democratic Party more. They're asking for more. And that's a good thing. So I think that's sort of a pattern that's happening. I don't think that they're leaving.
They're engaging with that discourse a lot.
Exactly.
More than,
and at the same time, I also see across the board sort of these patterns that manifest differently regionally, but it's kind of the same through line. No? So us talking about the fantasy heritage, of course, in the Rio Grande Valley, the us versus them rhetoric will be vis-a-vis the border, and asylum seekers. In the Bronx, a couple blocks from where I live, it is the sort of tension between like Afro-Latinos and Latinos there and black people. And the tension, the otherizing, it's the same through line, but it's built around different identities. The sort of the traditionalism, which I talk a lot about in the book, homophobia and transphobia, that's evident absolutely everywhere. The way that these conspiracy theories are feeding off each other. In Miami, maybe it looks like they're indoctrinating your children through communism, but in Colorado, it's the same transphobia, but just wrapped in a different language. But I'm curious to see if I'm sure here in Texas, like it feels different here.
I mean, yeah, and I think what's interesting is when you're talking about the different generations is I'm thinking about when I grew up and what I had access to, the kind of media I had access to, the newspaper and what came out on TV, and the kids now have at their fingertips TikTok and all these different social media platforms and Google, like that they can learn so much more about different things like their indigenous roots, their like the history. Right. And so I think it's fascinating to sort of see folks that maybe they would have identified as, Mexican or Hispanic only. And now that they're like, well, I'm indigenous, too. I did my ancestry. And,
that's part of the beauty of youth now, that you get to lean into. We get to lean into sort of these rights and freedoms and identities, I think, with a lot more freedom than our parents did. Some of us can have the freedom to do that. Yeah.
So I just finished your book today and I loved it, but it made me think of my own family history as a Tejano here and how we have this pendulum that swings. You talk about the binary aspect of usually the white-black dichotomy and stuff. And it made me look up the stats because you talked about getting over 30% for Republicans today, right, for Trump. And I looked at when they have over 30%, when they have under, and under is under Obama both times and Bill Clinton both times. And so it feels like this is like the third pendulum that swings. And it made me think back to early 2000s. I was living in Michigan as only one of two Hispanics in a small school. And in the wake of 9/11, it was like no, we're not that brown. We're not Arabic brown. And then in the 80s, that's when my family moved conservative. And so this feels like the third wave, kind of. And so I wanted to ask on the context of how does that fit the bigger picture, and how much of it is just the attraction to a Trump versus also the repulsion of being disappointed?
So I think about that all the time. I feel like in this election we'll have a better sense. No, I think we'll have a better sense whether those like 8 to 10 points that Trump did, like, is that an anomaly or is there like a deeper thing that's happening? I still do think that it is very telling. First of all, you're right. Like, Republicans have typically gotten at least 30% of the vote. Like that's part of what it means to not be like a monolith. No, it happens. But I do think Trumpism is different, and I personally think, and I think it's up for debate, I think that it goes beyond the Trump effect. No, I think once you sort of let out those feelings that Trumpism allows you to, no, once you really conform to the idea of mass deportations and to the language that he does, like I question, like, how do you come back from that? No, how do you sort of come back from that? And I do think, like, even the latest Telemundo NBC poll, they show, for instance, when you ask all of us, like, who is a better leader? Overwhelmingly, Latinos will say, from both parties, they'll say Kamala Harris is a better leader. She has the skill sets. And then those margins, for the first time in years, have started to really shrink when you ask today Latinos and which party best represents your values. And now it's still the Democrats, but those margins are really shrinking. And so I believe that Trumpism has allowed people to feel very comfortable with things that maybe for many years you sort of had to hide, because you wanted to honor your family's legacy of voting a certain way, or because it's just kind of an anomaly, to come out as a Trump supporter. But I think now we're sort of in the midst of understanding whether or not that's an anomaly. I think it's deeper. I think it goes beyond the Trump effect.
And there's so many layers. It reminds me of, I think you were talking to a DACA student who was saying that they were in this limbo for 10 years or however long. And they were looking at the folks who were coming across the border and getting asylum, like, why do they get to be, why not me? Exactly. And so that's why they would be against it, which is like...
Right, and then there's the added layer of the real... Again, at a national level, because I think here the party is doing things very differently here, but I think at a national level, there's so much, particularly in a place like Arizona and Nevada, so much disillusionment with the Democratic Party, with that idea of these broken promises, and that comes up a lot, with dreamers and their parents that have been waiting for 20 plus years for that, and then part of the mis and disinformation creates that idea that the newcomers. And that tension definitely comes up all the time. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for coming to San Antonio. My name is Michael Menchaca. I'm actually the artist that designed the tiles outside this building. But I just wanted to thank you for introducing new vocabulary to all of us and for repeating fantasy heritage over and over, because I think that one needs to sink in within the local community and the violence inflicted by the myth of the Texas, of the Alamo, and of the frontier fascist Anglo heroes, and that doesn't get enough pushback. And if I had to diagnose some of the laughter in the room, I think comes from colloquial complacency, having been fed this narrative over and over, the myth of the Alamo. And I'm speaking for myself, of course, but I've been working to deconstruct and decolonize myself of that narrative, having been indoctrinated from an early age, going to a field trip to the Alamo several times, and you become, you become brainwashed. And this film is up at the IMAX at the River Center, still brainwashing the tourists who come. On and on it goes. Sure. So it's just perennial, and then the perennial mourning. Chapter 6. I really appreciate you bringing that up, and the ancestral trauma that can be cultivated through algorithms now, through YouTube, through WhatsApp. And I don't know if I necessarily have a question, but I just wanted to hear your perspective on what you think is in store in terms of algorithmic racism, and what can be done to decolonize if there is some sort of app, that can, or how to work within that.
You should. No, first of all, thank you for.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I wanted to give you a gift. also.
I mean, I think you laid it out beautifully. So
Yeah, no, such a good commentary, especially being here in San Antonio and what we're seeing. You're talking about the monuments and the history and the whitewashing and yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Truly.
Hi, my name's Olga Brown, and I too want to thank you for being here today. And all of us who are here are interested in this, and so I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, what can all of us who are interested in solving this problem, what can we do? Today, you tell us. Me as an individual, what can I do?
Fix it.
I need more money.
Tell us what to do.
Honestly, I don't think I am not. First of all, thank you for even believing I can answer that question. I can't answer that question. I think my job, and I will say our job, is to expose it. Is to have the curiosity to expose it and to sort of draw us all into having those conversations and talking about things that I wish I would have sort of had this framing when I was working in politics, now outside of politics. And so the first step is to be open-minded and to even, honestly, I know it sounds cliche and absurd, but honestly, to have the care and intention to understand our history more. This is a very small part of the larger thing. And then I would say just to not shy away from those conversations. I think so oftentimes it's so easy, to dismiss, tiptoe around things, look at these films and movies and monuments and keep going. And so question and challenge it. Do you have something better to say?
No. I mean, you solve it. No, no, that was perfect. When he was talking earlier about the Alamo, it was making me think about whose stories are being told, right? Yeah. And that's sort of like a through line in your book. I think is something I appreciate is that you bring us into the car with Anthony. You bring us into that salon shop in the Bronx of this. Black Latina who doesn't identify as such, but is scared of them,
And I think part of it is also like whomever has the resources. I mean, we're in San Antonio, a city that's full of incredible artists and different voices. So if you have the resources and the platforms to expose different voices and artists like who we just met, let's do that. Let's normalize, I think, other voices so that these histories can be a lot more nuanced and. But I think exposure is the key for all of that.
Oh, and also support journalism. But
and that,
I mean, we can't tell these stories, right? If you don't subscribe. But yes, yeah. I mean, that's how we're able to tell that is buy your book and subscribe to my paper. But okay.
Okay. Thank you so much for being here in San Antonio. Born in Mexico.
Oh, and I'm sorry, this is the last question. I'm so sorry.
Okay. Immigrated to the U.S. when I was 4 years old. Went to public schools, community college, San Antonio College, as a matter of fact, before going on to UTSA. Been in education for the last 22 years. Proud to say that I'm here with my daughter, who's also an educator as well. And my question is really more, while you were doing your research, and this is something that we have talks all the time around the dinner table. When you were doing your research and the people that you interviewed and their actions and their frame of thought, were you able to decipher like what kind of education level they had, and was it more so, post-secondary, maybe some college and maybe some masters in there? Because I just want to know if we have 75,000 people going to ACC right now. 75,000, not including the UTSAs, the St. Mary's, the St. All the other schools that we have in here. And I just want to know, like, if there's anything that the education field can actually kind of do to change the trajectory that we're on.
I mean, if I asked you that question, you would say yes, no?
Of course, absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
I wholeheartedly believe that there's nothing more important than those transformative years. The power that educators have to really dig into these hard questions. I mean, that'll transform someone's trajectory. I did not go ahead.
But Anthony, a college professor, is the one who questioned. He was supporting Beto O'Rourke in El Paso.
That's right.
And it was a college professor who was like, "Do you really support him? Why do you support him?" Right?
But again, I mean, we're not here to judge anyone, right?
No.
Or maybe, but
it was like that. But it was his. I know, right? It was that question that made him look at.
But that's a good thing. But that is a good thing,
It is
right? The idea, you're right. Like Anthony Aguedo's college professor was the one that challenged him to really question his own sort of democratic legacy. We can agree or disagree with his politics, but the idea of you questioning is all right, you know? Then I think he's someone that was fed so many conspiracy theories. So once again, having the tools and the professors to really ground you into, particularly today, I can't even imagine what you and your daughter, what you all are really up against every single day in this era. Like I genuinely can't even imagine being a college student again. Like that is you're doing that is the work. But I 100% I couldn't agree more. I don't know everyone's sort of degrees that I interviewed. I don't. But it's the same through lines that I saw. No, it's the quest to belonging. It's the quest to find community. And it's the void of these conversations. No, it's the void of being in the right rooms around the same people that can guide you through that. So I thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you for your question. Thank you, guys. Okay. All right. One more, I guess.
I know we're out of time, so I won't have you answer, but I do want to put this in your mind. So people dismiss Texas as a battleground state because obviously we lean a lot red. But what I think we're seeing here in Texas that many people can agree is that we're a policy battleground state. We have a lot of policies that are being very carefully put out through counties, at the state level, in regions. And I think a lot of people are watching how the Latinos in Texas react to see whether or not those then breed a larger acceptance in other parts where the Latino emergence is coming. So again, for the sake of time and everyone wanting to get their book signed, et cetera, I don't need you to answer it, but I would love for you to take that perspective away and say, where have I seen policy battleground countries or regions or et cetera happen? And what can you later tell us through your journalistic friends or others, what can Texas start to do? What can the Latinos start to do to decipher in Texas specifically which to push back because they will have long-term repercussions? And what I love about what you said is there's such a thing as fantasy heritage, agreed, but there's also this idea that fantasy policy is somehow going to trickle down to you when it never will. So again, not going to ask you to answer it, but I would love for you to keep that in the back of your head as you think about the great work that you're doing. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Erica. Appreciate it. So what a wonderful conversation. Thank you for joining us here in San Antonio. I just wanted to say thanks to San Antonio Book Festival, Alamo College's District, and Texas Public Radio. Did I say your line? I don't know. Okay. Okay.
You didn't, but I just, I want a huge round of applause for Laura and Paola.